Here they come.
Here's Barbara, Dave.
Look at that. Somebody's Mount Kailasa, which is pretty impressive. David.
Hi, Barbara.
Oh, we got some more coming now. So he must have figured it out.
Hi, Dana, that image was me. You had said you would have used that on your book had you seen it earlier.
Yeah, it's on the Houston Smith book, you know. That was a choice that the publisher made. They were like, you know, big spirit, big mountain, you know. And it made for a handsome book cover, so I was fine with that. Well, hi, everybody. We'll just, we're 3 or 4 minutes past our time, but we'll wait a couple more minutes. Sorry for the glitches. Alex and I and Sydney realized we probably should have gotten on even earlier. We started just after 7, and it's taken us a while to get to see. I'm so happy to see your faces tonight. How wonderful. Just wonderful to not just be looking at my stupid old face. And I'm really excited to talk about Shunyata tonight. Such a strange and wonderful topic. Maybe we should sing a song or something while we're... where is everybody? I mean, I know where a couple of people are, but Sydney, you're in California, right?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Oh, you're in Washington, D.C. Okay, where are other folks tonight?
I'm in Maine.
Yeah, I figured.
I'm 2 hours outside Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, okay. Wow. What time is it there?
It's not bad. It's 9:36 in the morning tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
I'm ahead of everybody.
Yes, you're having coffee.
Yeah, tea. It's tea. Australia.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
We're in Perry, Maine.
In Perry?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Ah, I grew up in Washington County.
We know. Yeah, we've attended some of your talks and when you were with Rinpoche down in Machias.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Kathy Rogers in that time.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the crew. Well, we're yet an hour east and north.
Sure.
Yeah.
We actually lived in Calais a couple of years when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
So we got a bunch of people now, so let's let them in. We're approaching something like a quorum. I haven't seen Kathy for a few years, but what a wonderful person. Okay. And there's my old buddy, Carrie Swope. I can't see because you're just a little tiny square. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And Sarah Crisp is joining us and Doreen is joining us.
Karen.
Hi, Doreen. And Genla is there, who I haven't met. I hope to meet sometime. Jule. Okay, so I think what we should do is I can start warming up my voice, and then if other people join, we can add them in. There are a bunch of people who are signed up for tonight that we're not seeing, but hopefully that's because they would prefer to see the recorded lecture and not that they're kind of shut out by technology. Because we're on this meeting format, which I much prefer, because I can see you and tell when you fall asleep. So no falling asleep. And when we come to the Q&A part of things, hey, Karen. When we come to the Q&A part of things, then you can just raise your hand and I can call on you. All right. So I was saying last night, I was talking about the life story of the Buddha. Wait a minute, Sydney, you want to say some things before we get started, right?
Oh, I would love to welcome everybody. I'm have the great honor of serving as the president of the Siddhartha School Partnership. And we are so fortunate again to have our dear friend Dana Sawyer with us. He has been a steadfast supporter of Khyentse Rinpoche's most precious legacy project. And we just feel so lucky that he's brought last evening's teaching, tonight's Dharma teaching, and we brought this to you as a gift. And if you're so inclined, on our email that was sent around, 100% of any donation you make will go to the Fund for Teachers at the school. So we're just so happy to have you all with us. And we look forward to another great evening with Dana and great stories. The bathtub is resonating in my brain. Washing your hair last night. So, yeah.
It was a funny time in my life. I was a terrible surfer, by the way, just awful. I was more of a drowner. Okay, so I was talking about the Buddha's. Hi, Jolie.
Hi, you can actually see me tonight?
I can see
wow.
you. I can see
it's so good.
behind you. So I was talking about the success of the Buddha, and a lot of his success after he initiated his first disciples and he started these monastic communities that I was talking about. I told you he had been a Hindu, but there were huge elements of Hinduism that he jettisoned, which didn't allow him to come back in from the cold, so to speak. He had to go off and start his own religion because there were elements of his teaching, even though there had been this idea of reaching enlightenment for a while, a couple of centuries. He was against the caste system. He didn't like this idea of a hierarchy of humanity. And he was also opposed to the sexism that was in Hinduism at that time. There was very much in the Brahmanic culture of India in the 5th century BC, the idea that women were evolving spiritually, but their last lifetime, when they would reach enlightenment, they would be a man. So women and men evolve, but then at the very end, women will evolve into a male form in order to take enlightenment. And the Buddha said, no, anybody can reach enlightenment. It's about doing the work. It's not about your gender. He was also against Sanskrit. That, it's interesting because a lot of Mahayana sutras are in Sanskrit. And the reason for that was he wanted his teachings to be accessible. So he taught in his own language, which was related to Pali. It's actually a dialect of Pali that at that time was called Magadhi. So there were elements, is the point I'm trying to make, that kept him away from being able to be reassimilated into Hinduism. And one of those elements, and we will touch on it in spades tonight, was in mainstream Hinduism in the 5th century BC. There was a concept of an absolute eternal self called the Atman. And there was the idea that we have our body mind that we're seeing in these images of each other tonight, but we also have an absolute self. And that absolute self in the traditional culture of Vedic Hinduism, after death would go to a place called Svarga, which was a kind of paradise or heaven, and it would stay in that paradise eternally. So there would be some kind of, I don't know, Aldous Huxley used to use the term for the soul, the gaseous vertebrate. So a gaseous vertebrate, it would look like Dana, but it would be made out of spirit, and it would live in Svarga eternally. And the Buddha was against that idea. He didn't believe there was such a thing as an absolute self. And I'll say more about that as we move along tonight. So we're talking about Shunyata. The Sanskrit and Hindi word for the numeral 0 is shun. And there is a word shunya, which means empty. And you can see the relationship, can't you, between 0 and empty. So shunya, empty, shunyata. Should I spell that?
Maybe. By the way, is there anybody in the waiting room? Mona just texted me to say she was in the waiting room.
Oh, yep, she is.
Okay, thanks so much. Sorry to interrupt.
No, interrupt again if you see that. I've been trying to keep close attention, but haven't always been successful. So anyway, so shun, 0, shunya, empty, shunyata, emptiness. So in Sanskrit, ta, ta at the end is in English, ness. And so you that have been studying Buddhism would recognize that, for instance, Buddha ta, Buddha nature really is Buddha-ness. Can you follow that? And tatha means such. So tatha ta, suchness, which is just the way things are in Buddhism, the suchness of all things. I won't bog down in Sanskrit lessons tonight, but my point is shunyata, emptiness. And but not in the sense of outer space and not in the sense of a vacuum. It has a much more complex meaning, and we're going to unpack the different parts of that. I told you last night that there are several marks, 3 marks of existence, and those marks are of existence in samsara: dukkha, suffering, anicca, impermanence, and then anatman. So I told you that the word for this absolute self in the traditional Hindu religion was Atman, A-T-M-A-N. And the Buddha's teaching was Anatman. Now, Sanskrit is an Indo-European language, so just like in English, if you want to negate something, you put an A in front of it. And in this case, A-N instead of 2 A's together. So Anatman, no self, is the teaching. And why is that a mark of existence? Well, because people very often think they have one. They think they have a self. In fact, a lot of our suffering, the Buddha tells us, is because we have such a strong concept of self. We're used to the idea that aspects of us change. I'm in my 70s, so the body changes. Just 2 weeks ago, I had to have shoulder surgery. I'm falling apart. And we change our views on things. You know, talking about bodily change, I was talking with my doctor the other day, and he was talking about how over the course of our life, we're constantly shedding cells, right? Most of the dust bunnies in your house are your fallen out hair and your fallen out skin cells. And the fact of the matter is that by the time you're my age, every single cell that you were born with is gone. That this entire physical body I have now is an entirely different body than the one that was born to my mother physically. I mean, it's an amazing thing to think about. So the body changes and our emotions change kaleidoscopically sometimes if we're in traffic, and our ideas change. The idea, I grew up in the Congregational church. My ideas are very different today than they used to be. So we're used to many levels of change, but we very often have this, what the Buddha would describe as an illusion that all of these changes are happening to someone, and that someone is a fixed commodity, if you will, something that doesn't change. There's like a little tiny Dana man inside my head who is unchanging, and these things are happening to him. That sort of an idea. And the Buddha says that this is a construct we've built mostly out of the state of ignorance that we're in. And so we build this person and we form an ego around this person. This person has a personality and an ego. And I think I said last night that one of the primary words for ego in Sanskrit is ahamkar. So the first person singular pronoun, I, in Sanskrit is aham. And then kar, K-A-R, comes from the same verb root as karma, the verb root kri. So kar, and this is what is called in Sanskrit a genitive tat-purusha compound. Kar, action, making a me, making an I. Can you follow that? Ahamkar means making an I. And so we make an I, and that is the ego. That is the Dana or the Jolie or whoever. And so we project this fixed personhood onto the phenomena of our being. But the Buddha says there actually is no independent or absolute self. And if you're studying Jainism or Hinduism or Buddhism or religions of South Asia in general, you're familiar with this term Maya, illusion. And so at some point you've heard that Buddhists believe that we live in Maya, illusion. And that's true and that's not true. Buddhists don't believe that none of this is happening, that this is all somehow solipsistic or an absolute pure illusion. It isn't that this isn't happening, this is really happening, but we're misinterpreting this. We're misinterpreting this which is happening. Do you follow that nuance? Quite different, right? So part of the Maya is this idea that we have a permanent self. The self is actually an aggregate of the 5 skandhas, S-K-H-A-N-D-A-S, skandhas, 5 skandhas. So we're told by the Buddha that there is a skandha of form, a skandha of sensations, a skandha of perceptions. You don't need to know all of the Sanskrit terms for these. A skandha of mental formations, samskaras. We form these deep impressions in the mind, and vijnana, consciousness. So these 5 aggregates come together and form a self. And this self, if we take the aggregates apart, there's nothing there. Let me tell you a story about that. So
there, just to let you know, there'll be somebody in the waiting room here in just a minute. It's Michelle. Sorry to interrupt. Bye.
Okay. Somebody connected by audio only, I see. So long ago, there was a king in what used to be called Bactria. I don't know if you know anything about ancient Central Asian kingdoms. When Alexander the Great moved eastward and was conquering and conquering and conquering, some of the territory that is today in Tajikistan and Georgia and that area, there was a Central Asian kingdom called Bactria. And some of his generals who stayed behind afterwards created a very large kingdom that overlapped even as far south as Pakistan. And there was once, and then of course, when he made it to India, an interesting piece of history, he got his butt kicked. He died in what is today Pakistan. That usually gets left out of his story. So the Alexander the not so great in certain ways. Anyway, when Bactria had a king named Melinda, and Melinda couldn't understand the idea of the self being made out of aggregates, but not really being there. And so he called a monk named Nagasena to come and explain it to him. And so Nagasena came and explained it to the king. The king still couldn't really understand it. So Nagasena said, "How did you come to this meeting today?" And the king said, "I came in a chariot." And Nagasena said, "Good, good. Okay, we call it a chariot. But the chariot is an aggregate of several different components. Is the chariot in the wheels of the chariot?" And the king said, "No, no, because the wheels could be on some other kind of device or they could be repurposed for something else." Okay, that's not the chariot. And so he went through the various pieces of the chariot, deconstructing it, taking it apart into its constituent parts. And he said, "Which one of these parts is the chariot?" And of course, King Melinda said, "None of them are the chariot." And so Nagasena said, "See, this is what I'm talking about with the self, that we put these different aggregates together, and when we're together, we label that chariot. And when we put these 5 skandhas together, there's a phenomenon we call self. But if we take those aggregates apart, there's nothing left over. We don't find a little tiny Dana on the ground after the skandhas are taken apart. So there is no absolute self. Does that mean I don't exist, that you don't exist? We couldn't have this meeting if we didn't exist. But we merely exist, is the Buddhist teaching on that. We don't exist in some absolute adamantine way where this collection of aggregates, and we've come together for a while, and then at some point in the future, we take a dirt nap and the aggregates fall all apart again. So raise your hand if you feel like you pretty much got a handle on what I'm talking about. Oh, great, great, awesome. All right, so there is a concept in Buddhism called swabhava. Swa means own, and like the word swami comes from it actually. And bhava means being, so own being. And what that means in Buddhism is inherent existence, inherent existence. Not that it's caused by a collection of aggregates, but existing inherently. So one of the ways to understand Shunyata, emptiness, is in Buddhism, we're saying that you and I are empty of swabhava. Can you follow that? We're empty of having inherent existence. We don't exist inherently. We exist as the byproduct of an aggregation of causes and conditions that have come together and formed us. Okay, so again, it's not that we don't exist, it's that we merely exist. Although I say that, I'm seeing Jolie, and I remember that at one point, maybe 20, 25 years ago, Jolie used to have a bumper sticker on her car that said, it was very much a Buddhist bumper sticker that said, "Honk if you don't exist." So honk if you don't exist. And she's making that point that Buddhists believe that we don't exist in any kind of absolute way. So that's one aspect of understanding Shunyata. And, you know, I got to say it's supported in many ways by current research into consciousness studies and the relationship between brain and personality. There's a wonderful book by Tom Metzinger, M-E-T Zinger, Metzinger, called The Ego Tunnel. And the subtitle of The Ego Tunnel is The Science of the Mind and the Myth of the Self. The Science of the Mind and the Myth of the Self. And so what Metzinger is arguing as a neurophysiologist is that really the concept of self is really a principle of identity, of identifying me as an animal, if you will, separate from the world around me, which allows me to find food and hopefully avoid becoming food for some other kind of creature. So we have to have some understanding of difference between self and world. And as we have evolved as a species, we have a sense of ownership of this body. But similarly, he's saying there's nothing actually there except a neurological configuration that suggests selfhood. And one of the points he makes in that book, and I used to have fun with my students at the Maine College of Art on this one, is he points out several ways in which we can actually trick our mind, trick our brain into taking ownership for something that actually isn't even us. In other words, we can take something beyond us that we would otherwise other, it's not me, and aggregate it into us. And one of the examples he uses of this is the rubber hand illusion. Does anybody out there know about the rubber hand illusion? Oh, Genla knows about it. Wonderful, wonderful. So if you look on YouTube and you look up rubber hand illusion, you'll see some psychologists, doing it to grad students to have some fun. Basically, it works like this. If you have a person sitting in a chair and you put a shroud over one of their shoulders and they put their hand underneath that shroud, and then right beside their hand, you put a rubber hand that's sticking out into view so they can see the rubber hand, but they can't see theirs. And then you take two paintbrushes and you put one inside the shroud, okay? And you stroke the fingers of their hand with the paintbrush exactly in rhythm with stroking the fingers of the rubber hand. They will start to aggregate the two. And very quickly, I used to do this with my students all the time, it starts to feel like them. I've had it done to me, it's so weird. You will start to swear to God that that rubber hand is your hand, even though you know it's not your hand. I mean, like I say, look up rubber hand illusion on YouTube and you'll have some fun. But anyway, that's one of the ways that Metzinger is talking about how it's simply a principle for creating ownership of this particular animal body as we move around in the world today. But it has no swabhava, no inherent existence. He doesn't add that, I am. Now, a couple of things to say here. If we don't have any kind of permanent or absolute self and our body is going to fall apart here sometime in the future, what reincarnates? There is a concept in, first of all, it depends on what form of Buddhism we're talking about. I have to tell you, in Theravada Buddhism, the explanation here would be different than the Mahayana explanation I'm about to give you. So in Mahayana Buddhism, and you may or may not know that Tibetan Buddhism is a form of Mahayana Buddhism, that there is a jiva, J-I-V-A in Sanskrit. And this is what is very often called in Tibetan Buddhism, the continuum mind, continuum mind. So there is an aspect of the relative self that goes on, that is the inheritor of the karma from this life and goes on to the next life and the next life. It has no swabhava. It too is an aggregate, and it too will dissipate, specifically upon reaching enlightenment. And there's more to say about that, and I'll say more about it in a moment. But the analogy I use for this is, you'll remember that when cell phones first came out, well, they still have a chip in them, but there used to be the SIM chip. And the SIM chip had all of your personal information in it, the phone numbers of all your friends and all of that sort of thing. So when you got a new phone, you could take the SIM chip out of the old phone body and put that SIM chip in the new phone body, and away you would go. So the new phone body, if you're following my analogy, would be the inheritor of the karma, the personal information of your previous phone body. Do you get a feel for that? So that's how the jiva works in Mahayana Buddhism, that there is a continuum mind that moves from one birth to the other and is the inheritor of that karma, even though, you know, you could change species, change gender. Not only could you, but you have, is the understanding there. And so, you know, and this ties in with discussion of tulkus, for example, you know, tulkus, Tulkus. Tulkus are reincarnated lamas. So they're lamas who, like bodhisattvas, have decided to stick around, so to speak, and help the rest of us who haven't reached enlightenment. How many people have a pretty good understanding of what a bodhisattva like Amitabha Buddha or Avalokiteshvara, what they are? Okay, that's about half. So just very, very briefly, we are driven back into the cycles of samsara by our karma and our ignorance. And we don't really have a choice. We will be born back, you know, if we are remaining in ignorance. But the idea in Mahayana Buddhism is, when we reach enlightenment, bodhi, nirvana, several other names there we could use. When we reach enlightenment, then there's no need to take rebirth, right? We graduate, and yet we've built up so much compassion by that time that we want to come back to help others. And so Amitabha Buddha has vowed that he will never take final extinction until all sentient beings have reached Buddhahood. And so I'm talking about this because, does Amitabha Buddha have a permanent self? Does he have a self that has swabhava, inherent existence? Does a tulku, like the Dalai Lama, this is the 14th Dalai Lama, he's come back 14 times. So does he have a permanent self? And no is the answer. That was a rhetorical question. No. So some forms of Buddhism, some schools of Buddhism accuse Tibetan Buddhism of letting a permanent self sneak in the back door. Can you follow that? Because of this tulku concept and bodhisattva concept. But if you actually understand Tibetan Buddhism, you understand, no, they're just hanging around for a while until they let themselves dissipate. Did you follow that? Does that make sense? And we got the idea of the continuum mind, the jiva that reincarnates like the SIM chip in a phone. So now another thing to say, because we're dealing with emptiness, is we're not the only thing that's empty of swabhava, anatman, no absolute self. Everything is empty of swabhava. All of relative creation is empty of swabhava, inherent existence. Everything is made up of a collection of aggregates. The entire relative world is changeable and made up of aggregates. And I'm going to share with you the wheel of life, because that will help me talk about this a bit better. And you'll tell me when you're seeing it. Can somebody tell me if you're seeing it?
We see it.
You do? Okay, great, great. And can you see it when I zoom?
Yep.
Is it zooming and shrinking?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great, great, great. Okay, so let's start small and we'll zoom in. So here's the wheel of life, Tanka, that some of you have seen, I'm sure. And everything that's inside of the circle, the biggest circle, is the realm of samsara, the realm of rebirth. And we've got Yama, the Lord of Death, who is lording over samsara. And the symbolism is very direct, which is that everything inside of the realm of samsara is changeable and subject to death. All beings are subject to death. And why are all beings in this realm of birth and death, of rebirth? So now we zoom into the center, and what is it that makes the world go round is the kleshas. Do you remember me talking about that last night? The defilements, the impediments, the afflictive emotions. And so this is a symbology for three of the kleshas. We've got a pig who is the klesha of ignorance. And we've got a snake who's the klesha of anger. And we've got a cock, which is a rooster, which is the klesha of desire. So sometimes the primary kleshas are described as 3, sometimes as 5. There are many different kleshas, but the point is that in the wheel of life, the 3 primary ones that are driving beings back into existence are ignorance, anger, and desire. So one of these is having an influence on our mind where we're not even in control of our mind. The klesha is driving our behavior. And as we free ourselves from the influence of the kleshas, then we move up. And as we go under their control, we move down into the lower realms. And these are beings of the lower realms. These are beings of the higher realms. I don't know how much to explain the wheel of life to you. This is where the devas, the gods, live. This is where the asuras, the almost gods, live, and they're very jealous of the gods' wish-fulfilling tree. The animal realm, the hell realms. In Tibetan Buddhism, you may or may not know, there are lots of hells. There are cold hells and hot hells. I think there are 6 hot, 6 cold, and 6 that are other. This is the realm of the pretas. They're sort of ghouls and ghosts. And the human realm. So we're in the top half, which is a good place to be, I suppose. But the part I'm talking about here is these are the 12 steps of dependent origination. And it would take a whole other lecture for me to unpack those for you. But all you need to know is that everything in existence is depending upon aggregation. And this is an explanation of that. And, you know, one of the points I really want to make here when we're talking about how even all of samsara is empty in the sense of each element of it empty of swabhava, it doesn't in this particular one that I picked out for us, but if I had looked otherwise, there's usually an image of the Buddha in each one of the slices of this pizza pie. There'll be a Buddha in each of the 6 realms, not only outside of samsara, transcendental to samsara, but in samsara. And the point is that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are in the samsaric realm where they can enter it to help us in our spiritual growth, but also that the the seed of Buddha-ness is in all beings that are in samsara. And I think this is very important to understand because sometimes Westerners, when they're first learning about Buddhism, it can sound very much like an escapist religion. I'm trying to get out of life. I don't want to take rebirth anymore. I hate being alive. I want to transcend this horrible realm with this demon presiding over it and get out. And Mahayana Buddhism tells us there's really no out. There's no in, there's no out, there's no place to go. It's transcending our ignorance is the problem. We need to reach moksha, liberation, not so much from samsara as from ignorance, because when we transcend ignorance by reaching enlightenment, then we realize, as the Heart Sutra says, in this, I'm going to stop sharing. The Heart Sutra tells us, the Prajna Paramitra Hridaya means Heart Sutra, that form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And here the idea is that I'm trying to think of an easy way to explain that and realizing there is no easy way to explain that. Let's see how I do on this, okay? Let's try this and see if you can follow this idea. So remember me talking about the King Melinda and the chariot analogy of how we're made out of aggregates? Okay, now just remember that for a second. So now, Mahayana Buddhism, specifically Nagarjuna, the Madhyamika, great Madhyamika philosopher. By the way, the Madhyamika philosophy is often called Shunyata Vada, the way of Shunyata. And so the way of dependence is the way Nagarjuna describes that. I don't want to lose you. So we're back on the chariot. So we've taken the chariot apart and we find wheels and we find the timber that makes the part that hooks onto the horse, and we find leather straps to hold on to and make a bridle out of. And we find all these things. But now what Nagarjuna says, and he asks a very interesting question, is what are they made out of? Do they have swabhava? Do those aggregates, those skandhas I said that we're made out of, do they have inherent existence? And his answer is no. In other words, the building blocks are made of building blocks, are made of building blocks, are made of building blocks. Did you follow that? So he's saying that even the aggregates of the aggregates of the aggregates are also empty of inherent existence. Now, one of the curious things about that idea is there's some resonance with it in a buddy of mine, Nick Herbert, who's a quantum physicist, talks about this, that if we take something that seems very solid, I'm sitting at a table right now and I'm going to knock on it. Seems very solid to me. If I got hit in the head with one of the boards of this table, it would hurt because it's solid, right? Wrong. Because why do I say wrong? If I looked at the surface of this table through a very powerful microscope, I would realize that this very flat surface that I'm running my fingers over is actually extremely, extremely rough. And that actually the wood of this table is made out of molecules. Now stay with me because we're going to understand emptiness on a more complex level. So the table is made out of molecules. But if we could look at the table at that molecular level, it would look like a whole bunch of balls with tremendous space between them. And if we say, okay, but these molecules are solid, even though we can see there's space between them, then Nick Herbert would say, no, the molecules aren't solid either. They're made up of atoms, but there's space between those atoms. And not only is there space between those atoms, but those atoms have a tremendous amount of space inside of them. So the atoms are the building blocks of the molecules, but there are spaces between the atoms. And that if we looked inside the molecules, you may or may not know, if you took a hydrogen atom and you blew it up to the size of Yankee Stadium, the only solids in that structure would be the nucleus, about the size of a softball, sitting on the pitcher's mound, and an electron about the size of a pea circling the entire stadium, and all the rest would be space. But there would be these solids, right? There'd be the solid softball and the solid pea. No. If we went down to the subatomic level, we would realize the atom too was an aggregate, and that it was made up of more space than solid. So if you're following what I'm saying, that if we look at it at the molecular level, there's more space than solid. If we go inside the molecule and look at the aggregate atoms, more space than solid. If we go inside the atom, more space than solid. Are you following what I'm saying? Okay, so what am I saying? I'm saying everything is made out of nothing. Nothing. If that trend continued, right, there's not anything there. Now, of course, we know there is, but the point is it's some kind of aggregated energy phenomenon that we're living in the middle of. Did you feel like you got a sense of that? So form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, even works inside of a quantum physics model. And now a couple of things to say about that, that sometimes in Mahayana Buddhism, for instance, in Yogacara Buddhism, the consciousness only school of Vasubandhu, then there is very much an idea, well, okay, even though form is emptiness, emptiness is form, something must be here. And in the consciousness only school, they said consciousness is there, that consciousness is a foundation of all reality, if you will. Now, that's only one of the orthodox schools of Mahayana Buddhism, and they don't all agree with that. You have to remember that Buddhism rose up as an antithetical position to Hinduism. And in Hinduism, there's very much this idea that all of reality has a platform or a foundation called Brahman. And so that idea is problematic inside of Buddhism, but there is very much the idea that in the awakened state of consciousness, one understands and experiences this emptiness of all things. Again, not a vacuum, but that everything is made of aggregates in a way that can't be communicated with concepts. I was saying last night, and Doreen sent me an email message about the 14 inexpressibles. You'll remember me talking about them. The Avyakrita Vastu, they're called in Sanskrit. Sometimes they're called the inexpressibles, sometimes the indeterminates. And the point I want to make here, I mean, we're getting on in our time and I want to have time for questions, is that in the earliest phase of Buddhism, very often when people would start asking the Buddha philosophical questions, pundits, scholars would come and ask him questions, he wouldn't answer. He just wouldn't answer their question. And he would say, well, you know what, I'm going to read you something. I'm reading to you from the Dhammapada, which may be the oldest, the single oldest of all Buddhist texts. And it's a Pali canon scripture. So it's not in the Kanjur. But you may or may not know that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is currently having all of the Pali Canon, the earliest form of the Buddhist Tripitaka, 3 baskets, the Buddhist Bible, if you will, translated into Tibetan, which I think is very, very interesting. So people are asking the Buddha questions, and the Buddha's getting a little impatient. And he says, consider this story of a man wounded by a poisoned arrow. His friends, relatives, and well-wishers gather around him, and a surgeon is called. But the wounded man says, before you take out this arrow, I want to know if the man who shot me was a kshatriya, a brahmin, a merchant, or an untouchable. Or the man says, I won't let this arrow be removed until I know the name and tribe of the man who shot me. Or the man asks, I won't let you do it until you tell me if he was short or tall or of medium height. Or was he black, or was he brown, or was he yellow skinned? What do you think would happen to such a man? Let me tell you, he will die. And that is what happens when a man comes to me and says, I will not follow the Dharma until the Buddha tells me whether the world is eternal or not eternal, whether the world is finite or infinite, whether the soul and the body are the same or different, whether the liberated person exists or does not exist after death, or both exists and does not exist. He will die before I get a chance to make everything clear to him. Being religious and following Dharma has nothing to do with the dogma that the world is eternal. And it has nothing to do with the dogma that the world is not eternal. For whether the world is eternal or otherwise, birth, old age, death, sorrow, pain, misery, and despair do really exist. I am concerned with the extinction of these. So you follow his pragmatism. The Buddha is saying, all questions will be answered when you reach enlightenment, when you have this experience. So here's the practice. Here's how to do the practice. That no matter how much we talk about it on the conceptual level, that can have value. That can have value if it's urging us toward the practice, if it's supporting the practice. But only the practice leads to the insight that brings the ultimate understanding of Shunyata. Snelling, who wrote a very good book on Buddhism, writes, Buddhism knows no ultimate vacuum, nor is Shunyata a mysterious something. It transcends all dichotomies and can only be understood ultimately by direct insight. So that's, I think, enough about the concept of Shunyata before we have questions. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else there that I would say. Gaining that state of mind where we're seeing the world without mental projections and without the influence of the kleshas, to get down to original mind, that pure, clear, luminous mind, is the project. And in Dzogchen, you may or may not know that then your mind is empty and empty of those other constructs. You're experiencing the world more as it is, which is something we don't normally do. I'm looking around right now in this room and I can see your faces and I can see the computer. There's a lamp on each side of the computer that you can't see. There's a glass of water and a book. And my mind and human minds in general are constantly creating these entities, let's say, lamp, book, glass, water. And every day when we look at the world, for the most part, we don't really see the world. We see all these constructs. we are creatures and we want to live. And we learned a very long time ago that we have to bank our fire. We have to save our energy. We could be chased by an animal. Your computer, when you're not using it, will go to sleep. And human beings are very much like that, that when we don't need to have our attention drawn into the world, we go into a kind of torpor state. I was reading a book by a psychologist friend recently, and he refers to human beings as high-functioning sleepwalkers, because so much of our life is on autopilot. We get up in the morning and we go through our routine, the morning routine, and then we move on in our day and we keep changing the CD, but we tend to stay in this light trance. And we co-create this trance together. Peter Berger, the famous sociologist of religion, calls it the consensus trance, that we reinforce in each other the truth of these stories we're telling, and waking back up, shaking ourselves out of these patterns and out of automation, as psychologists call it, robot mind, if you will, is not always an easy project. I remember when I was studying Zen, Robert Aiken, who is a Roshi, he came into a class one day and somebody said, I don't understand this idea of mental projections. And he's saying, well, we section the world all the time on a pre-conscious level into, oh, this is safe. There's lamps and there's a table and there's a glass and there's a book and a computer. But none of those things are really there. And somebody said, what do you mean those things aren't really there? And he said, well, they're there, but I'm trying to explain to you what it means to see the world in a different way. And he held up a book. This was in Hawaii. And the book was more like a magazine than this particular book is. And he said, oh, what is this? And somebody said, that's a book. And he said, well, we label it a book, but it's a fan and it gets hot in Hawaii. So he saw people in the room doing this. And he said, what is this? And somebody said, that's a book fan. And Aiken Roshi said, no, it's a rain hat. Look out the window. And there were people in Manoa Valley running between the buildings with their books like this because it was raining outside. It's a rain hat. And he said, what is this? And somebody said, that's a book fan rain hat. And he said, no, it's not. And he threw it on a pile of papers that were blowing around in the desk. And he said, it's a paperweight. Can it work as a paperweight? Yeah, everybody said it could work as a paperweight. For 10 minutes, he did this. He just kept doing it for 10 minutes until finally he said, what is this? And somebody said, I don't have any idea what that is. And he said, now we're getting somewhere. So do you follow the lesson? I mean, he's really saying that if we peel back from all the constant tendency to robotically put everything in its place and in its silo, we certainly live in a more mysterious world than we commonly realize. And that consensus trance isn't just going on in terms of sectioning things off. The kleshas are creating habits that I called buttons last night. And we dance to those habits, those emotional habits on a very regular basis. So to practice meditation and to separate from that, to come back into a center and reclaim that original mind is, as I said last night, a noble goal of this process. So that was quite a lot, right? How about questions or comments about Shunyata? And you can raise your hand tonight, which is quite wonderful if you have something you'd like to say. Oh, I was clearer than I expected I was. Yeah. Dave?
Dana, you got into the quantum physics a little bit.
Yeah.
And, when you get way down into the bowels of quantum physics, it's, the way that we do the experiments and how we look at things and how we measure them, we actually affect, right, with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and stuff, we actually affect what we see, right, whether a photon of light is a particle, whether it's a wave. So given that, what are your feelings now? I mean, now I think a lot more highly of the mind-only school of Buddhism, because my goodness, we can see things completely differently at such a fine level, as you said, as far as we can get today, the building blocks of the world. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Well, the thought that's coming to me is religious studies today, the academic study of religion is in kind of a dire place today. The humanities in general have been colonized by, what would I say, envy of the specificity of the sciences, the STEM curriculum. There's such a desire to have that kind of certainty about everything that you don't find that in humanities, right? That when you're in the world of music and poetry and the humanities, there is no science going on. In philosophy, we call those qualia issues. You can quantify the quantifiables. Quanta is the Greek word for stuff. So there's stuff to measure, right? Stuff to weigh. The quanta of rocks, the quanta of plants. What am I trying to say? If you go into an art gallery and you want to quantify the paintings, you can do that by counting 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 12 paintings in here. But when you ask a qualia question, which one is best? Science gets no traction whatsoever at all. And yet what we find in the humanities today is a desire to somehow quantify the qualia aspect of existence. And I bring that up relative to what you said, Dave, because I was at a conference at Esalen not quite 2 years ago. And Nick was there and we're having coffee one day. And I said, he said, what's it like at your conferences now when you talk about mysticism and noetic experience and enlightenment? And I broke out laughing and he said, why? And I said, you can't talk about that. And, in professional conferences, they it's pornography. That's, not allowed. You can't even talk about it. And he broke out laughing. And I said, well, it's not funny. And he goes, no, that's not why I'm laughing. I'm laughing because we quantum physicists at our conferences talk about mysticism all the time. He said, in fact, if we couldn't talk about mysticism, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. He said, because when you get to the quantum level, everything is so mysterious and you realize how bound up it is with a consciousness that something really profound is happening on that level. So what an irony that it would be true. That's why I have to go to Esalen, right? Because we're still allowed to talk about it there. Gary.
Yes. Can you refer to emptiness as fullness?
Yeah, I don't see
where that's coming.
I know where you're coming from when you ask that question, and I would say yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
because words like that, all language comes up in this realm of samsara. So these terms are coming up. Do you follow what I'm saying? That all these terms are coming up in the realm of relativities, and very often when you're trying to describe something that transcends the world of stuff, the world of quanta, if you say it's unbounded or unlimited or limitless or infinite, then you're not telling me what it is, you're telling me what it isn't, right? You're just negating negating. It's not finite. It's not limited.
Right.
It's not. Yeah. So, you know, this is where we bleed over into those statements of the Buddha and the Dhammapada, of the indeterminates, the inexpressibles.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Mona?
Hi. Thanks for the teaching, Dana. That was great. So first I want to say,
where are you? It looks like it's daylight.
it is still. I'm in Mercer Island outside of Seattle.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. So that is my background. And you may hear the grandchildren going a little wild out there.
Oh, okay. I thought you were down the street here in Blue Hill.
Yeah, I was at one time. So I have one comment and one question. And, you know, I really appreciated the thought about scientists and mysticism, because I teach nursing, which people tend to think of more as a science. And I find that a lot of my students want to do projects around mindfulness and things that are more on the mystical side of life with their veterans and their patients. So it's really interesting, and they don't know that I'm Buddhist or that I'm studying this, or maybe I'm subconsciously guiding them in some way, but they really tend to go to those humanistic other topics in their work, and I love it. I mean, of course, I'm like, yeah, that's great, and I can really help guide them there, and then they find a lot of meaning in it that has sustained them. Even after they graduate, they write me letters and notes, and they say they might have, this one student said that she had 4 veterans come in one night who were suicidal. And she went back to thinking about creating meaning in the moment and how to do that. And she said normally she would have walked away from nursing that night, but she ended up being like a great night. And it was really taking a really difficult situation and making it work. So talk about taking Dharma on the path. Yeah. In a way that nobody even knows about Dharma, you know, so like just using that meaningfulness of the moment. So I really liked thinking about that of science and taking it to the mystical. And so thank you for that.
Wow, thank you. That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You know, there's from a Buddhist perspective, very much this longing to wake up, longing to self-actualize. And outside of Buddhism, I would see it all the time, you know, teaching college students all those years at the Maine College of Art, such a longing for transcendence, deep, like an innate sense, if you will, that there's something more going on than I'm being told about, that school is leaving a piece out that I really need to know, that I've got this sense that there's something just outside of my purview that I'm not quite pulling in and owning, an awakening. You know, Abraham Maslow, when he talks about his hierarchy of needs, that we need food and shelter as the foundation. And then we need love and belonging and community and a sense of purpose in life. And at the top, there's self-actualization. And he's, you know, he made a very interesting point, which was people think that so much of their neurosis is driven by repressed memories or repressed fears or something like that. And Maslow said, what if a lot of our neurosis and a lot of our suffering is created by a frustrated desire to self-actualize, a frustrated desire to wake up? And I think he hits the nail right on the head. I think that so many people and so many people in our culture, they just don't want another new Buick. They don't just want a new TV set. They're looking for something much more meaningful, and I think that something more is awakening. And my prediction is I'm preaching to the choir right now that you very well know what I'm talking about.
Or maybe that fundamental level in Maslow should really be that meaning in life, to have some kind of purpose.
Say that again.
If maybe on that Maslow needs of hierarchy, maybe our fundamental need is to have some sense of purpose, you know, or some sense of meaning. And
well, that, yes. Yeah. I mean, we definitely.
The pinnacle of actualization, maybe that's our basis.
Yeah.
Existence.
Yeah. You know, Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He saw the drive for meaning as a fundamental human drive.
Yeah.
And Doreen, you've completely changed into another whole other friend of mine. Do you have a question or a comment?
I do. Hi, I do.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Long time no see.
Doreen's haircut on a shorter level. I just wanted to share, it's nice to see everybody here, many long-time Dharma practitioners and friends. I wanted to pick up on something you said, Dana, because out of the last 6 years, I've lived 5 of those years pretty much in nunneries. And that's been just an amazing experience. I mean, the first nunnery when I was right before my 50th birthday, and I heard the gong ringing when I was 50 and then had taken the first novice robes, I thought, what have I done? I can't even dress myself. You know, my ego was flipping out and having its moments, but then living consistently in a community, especially this last 2 years, very intensively with Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo and her nuns, who are just very like super Olympian meditators. And everyone, 100 plus of us, I think 109 of us, everyone pulling on the same oar, constantly doing practices, constantly every summer going into 2-month retreats during that time period, and just keeping the rhythms 7 days a week, 24/7. That, I think, if people could understand the preciousness and value of monasticism, I wanted to share it because you were mentioning how difficult it is in the secular society. I mean, even to sadly go to conferences and not be able to talk about mysticism and the humanities. I mean, that's just tragic in my heart. But I wanted to just give a voice of hope that, you know, monasticism is something so precious, and it was really tough to leave, but I think now I have something I can maybe a little bit share more from that side of it and encourage us that we can create this. As Mona said, we get to still be the choosers and exercise the free will of what kind of society we want to live in. We have to become the elders now that really insist that this vision gets held and gets created. Because if we lose it, it's going to be unimaginable.
And what a transmutation of culture that would be, you know, to if the Dharma will really take seat in our world, how much change would have to occur, because its message is so antithetical to so many of the dominant messages of the society.
Well, it's time to find out. It's time to find out what we can do with wisdom and compassion in a big way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for the teaching, though, Panditji. Wonderful. Very delicious, tasty. Shunyata.
Wonderful to have you here. Wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, great to be back.
Are there any other comments or questions, or limericks are good?
I do have one more question. I have a question, not a comment this time. But if you talked about reincarnation,
yes.
And I know that some lamas have reincarnated into more than one form, you know, and I wondered if you could shed more light or more thought on that concept in Buddhism.
Well, you know, it centers on this idea of there not being an absolute self there, right? So the idea is that it's not like you're taking a solid thing and splitting it in two, because there is no solid thing. So that karma can go on in a different, it can separate. I don't know if that.
No, that is along the lines of what I was thinking. I just feel like it is sort of no form, no shape, no space, no time. And So it could be anything. It could remain in that formless realm and still take form.
I think, you know, one of the things that's occurring to me right now that I think is very interesting and exciting is that, you know, the Dalai Lama's been saying that maybe in the next generation, the Buddha will be the Sangha, which I think is a very interesting idea, that we're moving in ways where in our culture, we see it today where people are more interested in an egalitarian way of learning and discussing, as we are tonight, that my little tiny square on the screen is no bigger than anybody else's. It's not about it claiming absolute knowledge or being a sage on a stage. It's about where, as Ramdas says, we're walking each other home, right? That together we're growing and sharing and self-actualizing. And I think that's a very exciting idea, you know. Jolie?
Yeah. Thank you, Dana, for the teachings. The first thing I wanted to ask, is there a way, are you anywhere, like are you on YouTube? Are you, your recording of this, is that available?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Alex or would probably know more about that than I would. But yeah, it's recording right now because I can see in the top left there, it says recording. So they'll probably post it on the website somewhere or something like that.
Okay.
And yeah, you know, I'm a professor, so that's my job, right? And so because I'm a world religions professor, this past winter, I taught a course where one week I taught a mysticism class in 10 lectures. So one week I'm talking about Kabbalah. The next week I'm talking about Gnostic Christianity. The next week I'm talking about Sufism. So comparative mysticism is my expertise. So if you go on YouTube, you'll see me. In fact, this Sunday, I'm doing a whole day teaching for the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine on Hinduism. So, you know, I look like, I don't know, a serial believer. I keep changing my mind as what it looks like, but that's not what it is. Well, maybe that is what it is. You know, I've always kind of felt like I'm convictionally impaired somehow. I don't know what's going on.
Well, that's really good. So I'm going to try to look you up on YouTube. I'm not a big, you know, techno person.
There's 2 or 3 on there that are a much younger me. When I was on book tour for my Huxley book, I was giving lectures at the Vedanta Society in California. And so those are more from a Hindu perspective than a Buddhist perspective. But there's a I don't post them, other people do. There's kind of a mishmash on there.
Okay, well, thank you. And I just wanted to say that
I miss you, Jolie.
I miss you too. And I would really like, do you have the same email address?
I do.
Okay, then I'll connect with you personally. I just wanted to say that about Sangha, that Tashi Getsa Ling in Maine is the Sangha that Rinpoche started here, and it used to be held at my place, and then it was at Mayor's place, and then now it's at Doreen and Cole's place. But I wanted people to know that my home here is going to be deeded over to Tashi Getsa Ling. So my home, the old art studio where we used to all meditate, all of that is going to remain as a center so we can have a Sangha here and keep working with Rinpoche's teachings. And so.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And somebody asked me last night about, you know, the value of the Sangha, or maybe it was in an email. And I think that's so important to have. And hopefully all of you have good friends that are walking some kind of spiritual journey that you can talk with and be supported on. And when you talk about these strange, wonderful things, they don't kick you out of the conference or or whatever.
Well, I've been helping a lot of people who are addicts and alcoholics recover. And I find that Buddhism is so compatible with everything there. And so I've had to kind of condense it down and pass it on, but it's really been rewarding and a joyful thing to be doing. And I'm working my butt off with many people, but it's really been a way to take Rinpoche's teachings and the Buddhist teachings and apply them in another area of life in a way that's not religious at all.
Beautiful.
So that's what I've been doing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for doing that. Well, that feels like a nice place to stop, don't you think? Anybody else have anything they want to say in parting? Well, you know, embrace the emptiness, friends. How wonderful to be with you all, and thanks for Alex for asking me to do this. I really appreciate being with all of you, and be well, be well. Peace and love, and any merit we gain from these talks, let's dedicate it to the benefit of all sentient beings. Peace and love, everyone.
Peace and love. Thank you.